Hey everyone, welcome to another top 10 list. This is actually the continuation of my top 20 notes with stories. Last week I was able to get through 5 notes without boring you too bad. Then as it started to get a little longer, I figured, well, I guess we'll be making multiple videos out of this list. I want to thank Edward's Hobbies for coming up with this idea. I really appreciate this. I've got a lot of really cool notes out for grading still, so it's a little tougher to put together some of these top 10 lists. So I do apologize if I have to use some of my replicas for some of these notes. Anyway, we went through the first 5 notes of the top 20 last week. This week we're going to tackle notes numbers 11 through 16, or 11 through 15, or should I say 15 through 11. All right. Number 15 on the list. We are going with my spinner note. Okay, I should probably clarify. Spinner was the gentleman whose signature was on here. He was the Treasurer of the United States. Now, Spinner was the one who decided what the notes were going to look like. Okay, that's part of the job of being the treasurer. Now, the fractional currency, you have to understand, during the Civil War, coins were very difficult to come by. People were hoarding precious metals. Nobody wanted to spend coins. Everybody was just burying them in their backyard. And because of the shortage of coins, the federal government decided, well, let's print fractional currencies. And they turned to the post office. The post office came up with postal currency, and then they redid it to be fractional currency. This is from the 3rd series fractionals. You can see it does say fractional currency on it at this point. The first one said postal currency. This particular one is a 50-cent note. You can see 50 cent real bright on the back of there. Now, like I said, the person who came up with this idea was Spinner. That is Mr. Spinner right there. Now, why does this note matter? Well, because, like I said, this is Spinner. He put his own face on the note. Now, I want to say that the law was changed in 1867, saying that you cannot put a living person on a note, which means that Spinner was the last living person ever to be pictured on a note, and he put himself on there. Now, they still went ahead and printed these notes because they had already made the plates prior to the law being passed, but by virtue of the fact that he decided what was going to be on the note and he chose to put himself on there, that's kind of impressive. I mean, that takes a lot of guts. Now, one other little thing I never point out about these notes is that Spinner had a very interesting signature. This is his signature over here. And you'll see he does this huge loop. But you'll also find that on the sheets of notes that his loop usually connects to the next note. And you can usually see it when you go through. Let me just zoom in there. If you look at the bottom, you know, that one is just about complete there, so this was probably the bottom of a sheet. But if you look at the top here, you can see how it did bleed over into the other note. So anyway, that is number 15 on my list, the 1867 3rd series 50-cent note. This is actually one of the top 100 notes to own, featuring Spinner, who put himself on the note. Number 15. Number 14. Number 14 on the list, this is an 1886 $10 silver certificate, and this note is famous for being known as the Tombstone note. You can see the tombstone shape on here, and you may think, well, that's kind of a dark way to encircle a person's head on there. And by the way, who is that person? Well, the person listed on this note was Vice President Hicks. I'm trying to remember his first name, and it's not coming to me. Not Hicks, Hendricks. Vice President Hendricks. I can probably double check it in here. Let's see what we got here. This will tell me exactly who it was. Let me find the silver certificates. $10 silver certificate. There it is. Thomas A. Hendricks. That's who that was. Thomas A. Hendricks. And the fact, well, let let me just look at one other thing in here because I am so unprepared. I always seem to do this stuff on the fly. The spinner note, I always say that about the spinner note, and he was F.E. Spinner was his name. Bust of General F.E. Spinner, Treasurer of the United States. So that's who Spinner was. But this is Thomas Hendricks, Vice President of the United States. He was Vice President for a short period of time. He was only Vice President for less than a year. He died in November of 1885 in office. So when they put out the 1886 note, they put Vice President Hendricks on the $10 silver certificate. It's interesting that they use this particular thing because it's shaped in a tombstone, so this is kind of a tribute to him for dying in office. One of the other things with the old silver certificates, you'll see that it says specifically, this certifies that there have been deposited in the Treasury of the United States 10 silver dollars. Not $10 in silver, 10 silver dollars. So this note was good for 10 silver dollars, not $10 worth of silver. What is a silver dollar worth today? This was good for 10 of them, okay? Versus what is $10 in silver? $10 in silver is half an ounce. 10 silver dollars is almost 10 ounces. So that's the difference there. So it's interesting that they literally put 10 silver dollars on this particular note. Taking a look at the back there real quick on that one. So that is the Tombstone note, 1886 Tombstone, featuring Vice President Thomas Hendricks. That is number 14 on the list. Number 13. I went with the 1934A $10 silver certificate. This particular one is emergency currency from North Africa. It's called the North Africa series. The note does not say North Africa anywhere on it. The only way you know that is by seeing this yellow seal. Now, since it's a silver certificate, they did do the blue numeral, they did do the blue serial numbers, but to identify it as a North Africa note, they used the yellow seal. Checking out the back, it looks exactly like a normal $10 would. And this is basically the precursor to military currency. This was used by the armed forces in North Africa. When you think of the song From the Halls of Montezuma to the Shores of Tripoli, that's North Africa, okay? World War II, North Africa, going around the Mediterranean Sea into Europe that way. That's where these notes were used. And then, of course, they carried over into Europe as well. And they were used by our military, and by using these types of notes, they weren't accepted anywhere but military bases, essentially, so that if somebody was to get a hold of all of these, they couldn't do anything with them. So it was a way of protecting our currency with our military during World War II. These notes, I find, are just fascinating because you have the white paper, you have the black ink, you have the blue ink on the numeral and the serial number, you have the yellow ink for the seal, and then, of course, you have the green ink on the back. So it's definitely one of the most colorful notes you're ever going to find. So that one is number 13. Number 13 on the list. Number 12. Well, actually, for number 13, I should probably do this as well. I have the Hawaii version of the same note. This is still 13/12, same difference. This one would be the notes that were produced for Hawaii. The yellow seals were North Africa. That was basically to prevent Germany from doing anything. And the Hawaii notes were produced to prevent Japan from doing the same thing. You can see these actually have Hawaii printed on them. They used a brown seal there. On the back, they actually stamped Hawaii on them, making these much more easily defined compared to the North Africa versions. The North Africa versions had a 1, a 5, and a 10. The Hawaii notes had a 1, a 5, a 10, and a 20. So I pulled out the 20 because it's the higher denomination. Even though, as far as these two series go, the $5 note is the tough one to get. So that one is, those two are both 13, I guess we'd say. All right, number 12. For number 12, I'm going with the $100,000 gold certificate. Now, They printed, I think, 42,000 of these notes total, and they were never released to the public. They used these notes simply to transfer money from one bank to another bank, but they were never issued for the public themselves, simply bank-to-bank transactions. So if anybody ever says they have a $100,000 bill, no, they don't. Not only do they not have a $100,000 bill, every one of these was accounted for. There are two that are on display. I believe one's in the Smithsonian and one's at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing in Washington. Pretty sure. But so you can see one. Now, to own one of these is a felony. So if you have one of these, first and foremost, it would be a felony. Secondly, they're all accounted for. So no, you don't have one. And if you want to think about having one, no. If someone's trying to sell you one, I think I paid like $2 for this. So don't pay anything more than that. Otherwise, you could end up in a bad place. Not legal to own, but they do exist. Whenever you think of a $100,000 bill, most people just can't fathom that much money. But yeah, real deal. Used to transfer money from bank to bank, and basically as placeholders. So that is number 12 on my list. And number 11. This week I went with my 1862 legal tender. Now, this note has been graded 35, and it's got the EPQ. Last time I checked, it was the only 35 that had an EPQ, so that makes this note in and of itself kind of unique. But what makes this note so special? Well, prior to 1862, basically any bank could print their own money. The problem is there are so many different banks, there was no way to verify if any of the banks were solvent, if any of the banknotes were good, if any of the banks were still even operating. So people had a huge distrust for banknotes. So the federal government, also while trying to raise money for the Civil War, decided, well, why don't we put out the notes, and that way the people know that the stuff is good. And that this is the very first incarnation of a $1 bill. This is the 1862 $1 legal tender. It's a legal tender, so it was backed by bonds saying that this was going to be good. And this particular one features Salmon P. Chase, and I believe he was a treasurer at one time. He was also a Supreme Court justice at one particular point. Very famous man in our history. You should look him up and see all the different things that he has done. I mentioned in the past, Spinner. You can identify Spinner's signature because he always used this really interesting signature here. And once again, on Spinner, you can see how his signature does dip. This particular note does not have it on the top, so I'm guessing this was probably the top note, especially since you can see the numbers and the cutting here on there. So this was probably the first note on the sheet. Taking a look at the back, this one is in really nice shape. Yeah. For the first note ever produced by our government, that's what it would look like. So if you were doing strap searches back then, you'd have 1,000 of these. All right, so that is number 11 on my list of notes with stories. If you learned anything new this week, go ahead and hit that like button. If you like what you see and you want to see more, please subscribe. I love reading all your comments. Thank you to Edwards Hobbies for making this suggestion. I appreciate it. Guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you again next week.